Hey guys, it's Olivie Blake, and this is me not writing. So we're trying out a different location today. Mr. Blake pointed out that I could just continuously move around the apartment and be in a completely different spot for several weeks. So I guess we're gonna give that a try. I wrote some of these books. Let's see. We do have a lot to talk about today, or slash the things that we have to talk about are things I'm probably going to rant about. So this month's spell read, for December, I always try to pick something that's a little bit wintry, but I did definitely want to focus on a Jewish author, so I picked Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. I have talked previously about really enjoying this book. My fanfiction, How Lady Vengeance Takes Her Tea, is based on one of the storylines of this. Some people are expressing surprise, to which I must remind you to read the author's notes on stories that you read. I get a lot of questions like, was this based on this? And it's a question that's answered in the author's note. Otherwise, it's just me talking into the void, which, to be fair, is what I'm doing most of the time. That's irrelevant. The point is we're reading Spinning Silver. That's a thing that's happening. I hope you enjoy it. I will do a discussion post, but I'm kind of thinking that, since it's the holidays, you might be busy. But yeah, you're welcome to join in, to just do the read if you don't want to participate in the discussion. Always fine. But yeah, this is a reread for me, so I will be personally focusing my read on how Jewish folklore influenced the plot lines and the dynamics between the characters. Cover redesigns are ongoing. I just posted the Nocturnes, so I just cross-posted Nocturnes to Wattpad. I'd forgotten how much I liked that fic as a sidebar. Yeah, there's just a lot of stuff that I like about it that I hadn't thought about. I also didn't realize until I started posting all of these stories that I wrote a lot of them at the same time. I always thought it was sort of sequential, that I wrote Clean Marked Youth, and then I wrote Ride or Die, and then I wrote, and then I finished Nocturnes, and then in Nocturnes, it says there's an update for how to win friends and influence people, and I can't believe I was crazy enough to write all of these things at the same time. And Nobility, I think, was at the same time. 2017 was clearly a crazy year for me, so anyway, Nocturnes is now available. I Forgot a Beverage, oh well. A Little Light Pining, week 2 has posted. It is Fudge Theory by Coco Artist. It's so cute. It opens with a woman who's alone on Christmas, which I think is something relatable to some of us. Just very heartwarming and great, as are all of the stories. And then week 3 will be December 13th. We are sort of whittling away what author it could possibly be, but you're welcome to guess. You're also welcome to guess who the character might be. I love it when people theorize. I love it. That's the height of the writer experience is when people have guesses to what comes next. Okay, well, let's get started. I'm just wasting time. Okay. So, I sort of hinted at the fact that we were going to talk about this. This is a follow-up from last week. We were talking about resilience in terms of how you deal with bad things happening to you. And then this follow-up question also has to deal more with your relationship with yourself. So here it says, I second the idea to talk about resilience in times of difficulty and uncertainty. It's something I really struggle with and was working on in therapy pre-COVID. Pre-COVID was such a different time. We were such different people. Also, I found myself struggling with my relationship with myself recently. I'm finally doing regular exercise and losing weight, only to be upset that my boobs have got smaller as a consequence, so I'm not ending up with the body I wanted. If it wasn't my body, I'm sure it'd be something else. Why is self-love so hard? So yeah, that's really true. If it wasn't your body, it would be something else. It's always something, but I get it. So I brought up that I wanted to talk about my pregnancy, which is something I still find weird to discuss. I know that it might be, maybe you don't want to hear about it, but I do want to talk sort of about the reality of this experience, which is that sometimes I feel like people don't really talk about the fact that it is a little bit of an identity crisis. I mean, yeah, my body's changing and that's very confusing. I feel like I haven't recognized myself for basically since I got pregnant. I think even my face started looking different right away. I couldn't even stand to edit these because for the last 17 weeks, I have seen in my face that things look different. I've really got that Kate Middleton cheek thing going on. I mean, favorable comparison to Kate Middleton, but the cheek thing. wear a lot of cheek. But it's more than that. It's more than just the optics of like my body looking different. It also feels different. It behaves differently. My personality is different. I'm very tired. My productivity is extremely low. I find it very difficult to focus. And people often make a cute thing about pregnancy brain, which is essentially like I literally have fewer brain cells because my body is busy making the thing that's in my uterus, the thing that will eventually become my child, and it's like your brain is not that important. So I forget stuff all the time. I confuse things all the time, and I'm really dealing with that now as like, I never realized how much of my sense of self is buried in me getting things right. So now it's kind of like the smallest thing can kind of ruin my day. For Thanksgiving, I made this bread pudding that I always make, and I didn't notice until after I had made it that I had used almond extract instead of vanilla extract, which wasn't horrible, but it wasn't right. And I couldn't emotionally get over the fact that like, normally I would not have made that mistake. Like it felt so careless. I overheard my husband on the phone telling someone like, oh, she left the refrigerator door open again. And I'm just like, what's going on with me now? Like, I just don't even know what's happening in my head. I question myself when I start to drive at this point. I'm like, did I check to make sure there was a car behind me, or did I just think that I checked? It's like a weird, like, kind of horrific aspect of just like, I'm not really sure that I can trust myself anymore. I come home from the grocery store and realize I bought the wrong almonds or something, and it just becomes this weight that's just like, I take so much of my self-worth and what I think is my worth to others. This is something we talked about before, that I gauge my own worth to others by like being the thing that they need and providing them with all their needs. So to be only able to give myself, my body, and my growing baby what it needs, and everyone else is kind of like, I'm trying, but it might not work out, is very weird for me. I think I've just built so much on myself, so much of myself, my identity on getting things right and being, always knowing what people want or what people need and being able to provide them with that. Having that be absent is very, very strange for me. And then also there's the physical aspect of like, on the one hand, it's very freeing because I don't feel the need to be desirable to anybody right now. Like the only person that matters is my husband. And I don't have to worry about that. But it used to be like, I used to be the kind of person who couldn't go to the grocery store without putting makeup on. And now I'm like, I couldn't give less of a fuck if anyone is looking at me. In fact, I hope they aren't. So in terms of body image, it's been a little bit freeing, but also a little bit strange. And like, who am I? I don't have the productivity I used to have. I don't have the looks that I feel like I used to have. So what's left? And then when you think the what's left part, it's like, oh, that's me. That's actually me. Because all these other things are just like parts, the parts of the whole. It's kind of like this mysterious thing of, I often feel bad about myself that I'm not doing as much as I used to do. I'm not capable of doing as much as I used to. But then to see people still care about me and to still like be happy for me and love this baby with me because it's mine is really rewarding and strange. And it's this remarkable reminder that it isn't how you look or what you do or what you give, but who you are that makes you valuable. And I know that was a really long-winded way of addressing this. That's just sort of my personal journey that I'm on, because obviously, you having to deal with your changing image of yourself is your relationship with yourself, your own process to go through, to deal with, to hopefully come to the same conclusion that's, I have not lost any value because the shape that I take has changed. Because am I the shape that I take? No. Even if that does determine how we behave or how we love or how we think that we are loved, those are really misconceptions. And so, yeah, I think I said before, when I said it, I couldn't remember who had said it, but I think I wrote it in Minerva's diary in Modern Romance about how like the most revolutionary thing that a woman can do is like herself. Specifically a woman, because there is so much marketing targeted at making women feel like they're not enough. Like they need makeup, they need complex skincare. If you're not doing all this stuff, then like, are you even a real woman? And this is going to come into play with our next question also. You know, there's this need to like, we can't be too young. When we're too young, when you're a child, you have no use. Women are, you know, girls are sexualized so much earlier. But at the same time, when you cross that 29 into 30, you suddenly become invisible, right? You become an aging woman. Your relationship with yourself is hard. It's also one of the most important relationships you have, because you cannot have healthy relationships with other people if you don't have a good relationship with yourself. I wrote down another thing that I had written. I'm very sorry that I'm quoting myself. But part of why I felt like I needed to write The Killer's musical, Mr. Brightside, and The Atomic Bomb was that I really wanted to focus on that feeling of like hopelessness and feeling like something's wrong with you and dealing with it and sort of grieving with the loss of aspects of yourself and your perception of yourself and how you deal with things that happen to you. And so one of the lines towards the end of the story is a doctor, a psychiatrist, telling the main character, Julian, "In my medical opinion, you're fine, Julian. Coping at times, managing at others, but generally fine." And I think that's the thing that I really wanted to talk about, that I started talking about last week, which is we don't have to aim for this perfect sort of sense of completion. You don't have to love yourself all the time. It doesn't have to be nonstop, I feel good about myself and what I bring to the table. There are going to be moments when you doubt, and that's okay. You can cope at times, you can manage at times, but overall, if you can remind yourself that I have this value, it is mine, no one can take it from me, then I think that's important, as long as you can have those reprieves of, I don't have to feel down on myself all the time. Which I know is asking a lot, even those spare moments of just feeling like I'm okay, I'm doing okay, people love me, and I am important to people, not because of how I look or what I've done or what I will do or, you know, what I have yet to do, but just because I came into this world worthy. And that's who I am, with someone who's worthy. And yeah, and so the more that you can remind yourself of that, the more you can have those, even if they're precious moments, even if it's just brief and quiet where you feel, I'm lucky to have friends, to have family, to have a significant other, to have a job that means something to me, to have, you know, whatever it is that you have, if you can sort of hang on to that for a moment, that moment is very powerful. That moment is what helps you. That's the moment that makes you keep going. That's what gets you out of bed in the morning. Not to give you like a whole lecture. I was just thinking the other day that when I was a teenager, like a young teenager, I started cheating at running the mile. I didn't like running. I still don't really like to run, and certainly not for PE class. And so one of my first confessions with a priest was I cheated on the mile. I kind of I fudged it so that I like sort of walked one lap. You know, there were too many students for them to really be paying attention. So I made my time come out to about what I thought it should be, even though I only did 2 large laps instead of 3. So then the priest asked me like, well, why did you do that? And I said, well, I don't want to fail at it. And sometimes it feels like if I actually try to run, it's too much work. It doesn't end up being a time I'm proud of. And it just seemed like, you know, what was the point? And the priest's exercise for me was to list to myself every day 5 reasons why I was a good person, basically, why I was proud of myself. And I thought that was a weird but correct way of dealing with it, you know, now in retrospect, of dealing with like a preteen's problems, is to think, yeah, I don't need to cheat at this, because I'm good at these other things and I am valuable for these other reasons. And I think sometimes exercises like that are really worth doing. That's just, if you can recall what you like about yourself, that's actually a very powerful tool. The next one is a long ask, and I think my response is probably going to be long too, so here we go. How many times are we going to have to watch someone express shock and amazement that a woman doesn't appear to be in her 30s before we realize that A, 30s aren't old and women don't shrivel into old maids who only know homeliness and no fun the minute they hit them, B, aging is different for everyone and there's no specific way it looks, and C, it's just like really rude to act like a woman is somehow better because she doesn't look old or act as old as she is. I know society values youth and that's just how it goes, so maybe it's a pointless thing to be mad at, but I am. I saw that tweet yesterday about how someone couldn't believe Chrissy Teigen was in her 30s and she's ageless, to which she rightly responded that 35 isn't old. And I've seen others about how Beyonce hasn't aged a day since she was in Destiny's Child, etc. It's maddening the way we all dance around reality, pretending women are actually ageless beings in order to praise them. Yeah, and I would say that actually you can see that Beyonce and Chrissy Teigen have aged in a good way. They're different and they look different, and I think it's a good thing. I think I'm mad about two different things here, but both feel valid. I'm mad that I've seen so many people lately post in disbelief at someone being the elderly age of 30 plus and not seeming like it, so maybe we should take all that data and reevaluate this concept of your enjoyable life ending at 29. I'm also mad that women specifically can't win. It's like we have about 3-ish years where a pretty acceptable age to be both pretty and interesting, any younger and we're attractive but basically children, not to be taken seriously, any older and we're disgustingly hideous and too old to be loved but somehow too young to be taken seriously, especially when in a male-dominated environment. AOC, who is constantly laughed off as not understanding what she's talking about with her political ideas. Do we ever just get to be? So, I am the same age as Taylor Swift and AOC, which has been very interesting to watch. And it's something that I kind of wanted to talk about earlier. And when I was sort of crossing that 30 finish line, it seemed like a big deal because it seems like we are constantly told to project what our lives are going to be at 30. And then if you haven't reached all those things, it's like, are you going to accomplish anything? Which is, of course, ridiculous because, I've barely lived at all. And, I have so much life left. It's crazy to think, if you had everything at 30, then what would you do for the rest of your life? I don't even really understand that. But yeah, sorry, this person added mandatory disclaimer. I know men also face these issues in their own ways as well. Yes, Mr. Blake, when he turned 30, he's 2 years older than me. And when he was turning 30, he had sort of like a career crisis. That was when he changed his career because he sort of was feeling, I think that women, we deal with our fertility questions and the question of, should I be a mother? Do I need to be a mother right this second? Do I have it in me to be a mother? It's kind of all about our fertility. And then men, especially older sons, they have what I call provider syndrome, where they suddenly think how do I have it in me to be a provider? Do I have all my ducks in a row? And that is definitely what happened to him. Also, I acknowledge an amount of aging does happen between your 20s, 30s, 40s, etc. I'm not suggesting they're identical experiences, but in general, I think society is way off with the perception of age. Yes, I think you're correct, and I think that a lot of my audience is in that late 20s, nearing 30, just past 30. That is definitely a subset of my audience that I've written for. And so I wanted to read you a little bit from The Princess's Guide to Popular Statecraft, because this was something I wanted to focus on. In The Commoner's Guide to Being a Royal, these characters are in their early 20s, which is they don't really have to worry so much about this, because I would say that the early 20s are the prime female age, and yet if you're under 25, you barely know anything. So the sequel to that book, story, is essentially, well, what do you do when you start to realize that you are seeing the world as it is, but people are seeing you differently? So this is from the beginning of chapter 8. It's interesting what a difficult age this is. A 30-year-old man, young, flourishing, or perhaps in the worst case, on his way to becoming a silver fox and settling into his socially inoffensive dad bod. 30-year-old woman, it depends. Is she married? If she isn't, she should be by now. Her friends certainly are, which isn't even to speak of divorce. Does she have children? If she doesn't, she should soon. Within 5 years, she'll be considered geriatric. Sure, she's projected to live at least another half-century, but if she hasn't singled out a mate, if her relationships don't last, if she hasn't excelled in her career, if she doesn't have it all by now, then will it ever happen? Has she accomplished everything she ever hoped to do in her lifetime, despite only understanding her existence in the world for about 5 minutes, if at all? If it isn't one thing, it's another. If it's not spinsterhood on the horizon, it's the vestiges of an empty career. They ask us to project where we plan to be at 30, and we are nearly always wrong, so what does this do to us? We are measured by our eclipsing beauty, by our fading youth, rather than prized for our maturity, our cultivated talents. We feel shamed for losing our way, rather than praised for the skill with which we deftly changed our paths. What does that do to our sense of worth? And who do we become when the sexualization drilled into us since puberty gets diminished by others from this point on? How do we perpetuate this sense of expectation among ourselves? How do we unworship the prodigies and the ingenues? How do we age out of the sense that in some way or another we've crossed an invisible line and somehow failed? 30 is by all accounts still young, and yet filled with a certain unavoidable dread. Which is to say I'm fine. Thanks for asking. So yeah, I understand that what you said is a rant, and there's nothing I can say to fix that. All I can do is sort of agree with you. I think it's very strange how we value women for looking not their age, which is so strange. I think it's hard to watch women be punished for having wrinkles and lines and for looking like they have existed for longer than their 20s, when there's so much more to be said about a woman who is old enough to have learned something about herself, to have accepted who she is and been that way on purpose. It does have sort of an aftertaste of misogyny, I have to admit, that it's just like we as women should appreciate each other as we get older and not expect each other to still look young, because the only reason we have to seems to be out of a need to be desirable and worthwhile to men. That might be a generalization, but I have to say that I think that's it. I mean, I think a lot of it revolves around us continuing to be sexually desirable, because otherwise, why would you need to be young? What is the point of focusing on youth if it isn't about sexualization or desirability? I think it's a bigger question of how do we deal with this, and I think that it kind of starts with us and how we treat other women and how we look at other women, and whether we say things like she looks old or she looks too young, or I don't know. I think it just, everything really comes down to how we interpret the world and how we pass on our interpretations of the world to other people, how we talk about, we're talking about celebrities because they're very visible, but about all women. So I think, yeah, as always, it starts with us and how we judge each other and how we judge ourselves. Definitely how we judge ourselves. There were lots of times when I would say to my husband, I used to be a prodigy. I graduated from college early. I had my master's so fast. I was one of the youngest people in my law school class. And then I changed my path. I changed my mind. And now I'm one of the older people. And it felt embarrassing for a while. It felt like, why couldn't I have gotten here sooner? But I just had nothing to say for years, sure, I've been writing casually for a lot of my life, but the things that are good, the things that have real value, the stories that actually really reach people, it took me longer to write those. I had to fail at some things. I had to learn what it felt like to fail. I had to learn what it was like to just exist as a person in the world before I had something to say that was worth saying. And it took me however many manuscripts it did to find a career in publishing, because I had to have experience. And that's not something, it's not innate. It's not some just magical talent I was born with. It was something that took me years and years and a lot of work. And so I would like to be valued for the fact that I worked hard for this, and I still see a lot of stories about like, oh, look how young this author is, or look how much this person has accomplished by the age of 21 or 22, or the 30 under 30 list. And that is great. I think that youth should be taken seriously. I think that youth is valuable, but I also think that it can be overvalued. And I think that it causes us to have a very difficult relationship with ourselves, because it's just expecting so much to have happened before those things can conceivably happen. And then it kind of is coupled with the shame of, you haven't done this fast enough. You haven't gotten here soon enough. And it overlooks how long life actually is. Yes, life is short in the sense that you should value your relationships and yourself, and you shouldn't waste it on, self-doubt or doing something that you hate or being with someone who isn't right for you or whatever. That's when life is short. But life is long when it comes to changing your perception of things, yourself, of others, when it comes to changing your path, when it comes to seeing how much is still out there and still within reach. So, yeah. This has been a very long rant, as I knew it would be, and I think essentially, yes, I'm agreeing with this person that aging is hard on women. And that's why I wrote this whole story, basically a novel about how hard it is to turn 30, because it's like a very important age in terms of the existential crisis. I think I also shared an article a bit ago about how 30 is like when you really have that crisis with your relationship with your body and whether you want to be a mother and all that stuff. It just kind of all cycles around this age. There's the planet that I can't remember right now that I'll put in a little thing at the bottom of the screen that like changes every 30 years. It's just, there's many reasons why you would have this crisis of 30, but it shouldn't be something that's enforced by the outside world. So yeah, if we could just stop thinking of women in terms of how they're aging, or at least superficially how they're aging, I think that would be a great first step. Okay, well, I don't know if that was answered satisfactorily or at all, but I certainly talked for a long time, so let's move on with our lives. Next week, week 3 of Little Light Pining, keep an eye out for that. I think that's pretty much it. So yeah, this has been me, Olivie Blake, not writing, and I'll see you next week.